The walls may be closing in on Maine Senate candidate Graham Platner as he reportedly faces tough questions from Senate Democrats over whether new allegations will come to light. This comes as a growing list of controversies threaten his bid for office, including, but not limited to, explicit text messages, sexting allegations, a Nazi-linked tattoo, and deleted comments on Reddit mocking a Purple Heart recipient. Where do Democrats draw the line? Well, hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Kayleigh McEnany. Here's my co-host, Harris Faulkner. Also joining us, Rosanna Scotto, Fox 5 New York anchor and host of The Underground Economy on Fox Nation. Lisa Booth, Fox News political analyst, and Dr. Siegel, Fox News senior medical analyst, professor of medicine at NYU Langone Health, and author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Miracles Among Us, How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing. Well, according to the Wall Street Journal, Platner told Democratic lawmakers, quote, "The worst of the rumors we've all heard are not true," uncertain what that means. Now, as a reminder, this is the same guy who covered up his tattoo that was previously recognized as a Nazi symbol, but he only did so when it was politically necessary. And here's another photo of Platner shirtless in a towel. That was his profile picture on a dating app he used, despite being married during that time. And liberals, including AOC, are dodging questions about those allegations.
Should Democrats abandon Graham Platner after these messages came out, these sexually explicit messages they sent to women?
You know, I haven't waded into that primary. I don't believe the primary has occurred yet. So I would kind of, you know, again, I don't wade in on that. I haven't waded in that race.
And last hour, Democratic Senator John Fetterman told Fox News he has a different take.
Are you concerned that there's more to drop?
Well, he lied to everybody. He said that there wasn't any after his Nazi tattoo situation. And now there's more and more of the things. So he's already lied about that. So I assume, you know, it's like they say, for every ranch you see in Texas, there's 50 that you haven't seen. So I'm sure there's a lot of more ranches in P. Hustle's life.
I think that's absolutely correct. You know, Harris, I'm so confused when I heard this yesterday that Platner said the worst of the rumors we've all heard are not true. I mean, to me, the worst of the rumors are the Nazi tattoo, which you have described in detail, and that is true.
Yeah, it's not just a symbol that you might or might not be familiar with. It is what the concentration guards wore as they were presiding over the torture and killing of millions of Jews in the Holocaust. That's what he had on us. Not for like a day or a week or anything. He had it there for nearly 20 years and said he didn't know, he'd cover it up. Look, I do think that is horrible, and normally I would say that would be the worst. But now there are children of every ilk. I'm sure some of those children may even be Jewish, so maybe it all comes together. I don't know. But this Kick situation that he's got going on, that Kick app, that as of 2 nights ago he was still on. You know, I said yesterday I refuse to check it every single night until he takes himself off because it's icky. I dug deeper. It is 75% of the people on that platform who are young are between the ages of 13 and 24. That's a big number. And at one point it was looked at in 23 and 24 that 40% of American teenagers had been on the app or were members of that app. I mean, this is a situation where this man potentially was on a platform with mostly minors at any particular time. Now, it's been reported there could be as many as 12 women that he was sex texting with. Look, I don't care about the man's marriage. I don't mean to sound cold, but I really don't. That's up to him and her. But if he was on a platform where there was minors and that percentage sits there, are we waiting for a TikTok on when we find out the 6 that his campaign will say that he was messaging with are not all adults? It's a good question. Are we waiting for the earlier reports that said there could be as many as 12 and then the campaign confirmed, no, there were only 6? That doesn't make anybody feel better. Could there be more? I think that is the slippery slope that we're looking at. The Nazi tattoo is horrific, and it makes him look like a monster that he would have that on his chest for that many years and cry wolf about whether or not he really knew. But if he was actively engaging on a platform with minors and he bumped up against one of them on that platform, I say let's dig with a bigger shovel on this guy.
Yeah, I'm glad you're not having to check the profile every night because it would give you nightmares, right?
It's gross.
It really is. You know, Lisa, I'm stuck on what Elizabeth Warren said. She said there's a difference between marital issues and allegations of sexual assault. Well, I mean, we don't know exactly everything she said, but did she ask about the Nazi tattoo in this? We've known about that for a long time. Did she ask about him calling the army absolute trash, full of lazy, fat trash? Like, was that at all a priority?
Or did she ask him, to Harris's point, what were the ages of the individuals he was messaging on the Kick app, which has been known to be a predator's paradise? So I think that's the key question that should be asked of Graham Platner. Look, I mean, he's not just a flawed candidate. He's a depraved candidate. He should be seeking therapy, not political office, is my opinion. I have a theory right now. I think it's actually Democrats that are putting out this opposition research on him. They have 2 deadlines in front of them to try to get him to step down. You've got the primary next week, and then you've also have up until July 13th and, with Maine election law, where he could voluntarily step down and they could replace him. I think they're doing to him what they did to Eric Swallow, because if you were Republicans, you would wait until he is locked in on that ballot in a general election to then drop this opposition research. I will point out that we still have 5 months to go until the general election. So if he ends up being the candidate, that's a lot of time to unearth additional information about him. The last thing I'll point out is that Susan Collins is a political survivor. Not only has she won statewide 4 times, but if you go back to 2020, Joe Biden won Maine by 9 percentage points. She won her Senate race by 9 percentage points. That's about an 18-point swing or split ticket that you see from the top of the presidential ballot to the Senate. That is unheard of in American modern political politics, where you have split ticket voting to that extreme, to an 18-point margin extreme. So she is a political survivor. But yeah, so I think that Democrats are trying to, stick it to Platner to try to get him out.
I think that's exactly right. And she's the only Republican senator in the Northeast for a reason.
Well, and she's also the only Republican senator running for re-election in a state that Kamala Harris won, which is why Democrats, at least publicly, have been doubling down on Platner.
Rosanna, Senator John Fetterman, the only voice of reason in the Democratic Party right now, has some questions for P. Hustle. Listen to this.
Why is P. Hustle on Kick? I mean, Kick has serious issues, lack of kinds of controls, a lot of underage people. It's really been controversial. Why was he on it for a decade?
That's the question Harris has, and that question was shouted at him. He didn't answer it, and I've yet to see where he has. He should answer it. Put out a statement now, say there were adult women, end it.
I have to say, first of all, character all the way around. Senator Fetterman has really stepped up in character. I mean, when he first got elected, everybody was like, is he going to be able to make it? He's become the voice of reason in D.C. Principles. Let's talk about this. These politicians talk about principles and standards, except when it comes to control of the Senate and the House, then everything goes out the window. I mean, here this guy is, Platner. He's got so many problems. I mean, talk about his character. He's had to put his wife up there, and she had to play the Stand By Me woman. And then he goes after an Army veteran, Purple Heart recipient, who risked his life saving other people in a firefight. I believe it was in Afghanistan. Then he's walking around with a Nazi tattoo for 20 years until he basically gets caught. And then he's on some kind of app that I never heard of until basically recently. Obviously, why would I know that?
Yeah, it's a good thing you don't know.
Why would I know
I never knew it either. I just know it now.
I know.
P. Hustle 0331.
That's a positive thing.
I know. Why would I know that app? But all principles have gone out the window with this candidate. And, growing up, my family was always in politics, and I was so lucky to meet so many interesting people over the course of my life. And you admired these people. You really, who do we admire now? I don't know. We have really flawed people out there.
And Dr. Siegel, AOC, she said, I haven't waited into the primary. When she was asked, she said the primary hasn't occurred. Well, that excuse lasts till Tuesday. Every single Democrat is going to be forced to answer about Graham Platner.
Yeah, I think that AOC, clearly running for political cover here. I think that Fetterman, I think I have to study Fetterman as a medical miracle, because he has become unbelievably different since he's gotten in office. I was the one saying his depression, his stroke. Look at him with his great wisdom. And I actually believe Rosanna's right that family values are an issue here. We get to vote on that, don't we? We don't have to like that somebody is cheating on his wife with potentially underage people. That's a predator. And as far as
that's a crime.
That's a crime.
Like that's not your moral standard.
Not just somebody.
That's your criminal code.
Right. That's not just somebody being unfaithful. But the Nazi tattoo really bothers me a lot. It's called Totenkopf. Mm-hmm. And he's saying he can't get rid of it so easily. Even now, after 20 years, Kayleigh, you pointed out, 20 years he could have gotten rid of it. He's saying, I'll cover it, but it takes a while to get rid of it. How about starting today?
Yeah.
You could start getting rid of it today. You'll have it off by the time you potentially got into office. He's not even serious about getting rid of it.
But he has it off now.
No, but you have to actually get it removed, which is a medical process that takes about a year. He has it off, but I want to see that he's serious.
He's got it covered.
Right. He's got it covered. But he didn't get there's a painful process to get it actually removed. I want to see him do that if he really means it.
But why would he get it to begin with?
Yeah.
That's right. And leave it for so many years. Yeah. Decades.
Can I ask you, because you've worked in the White House, you know these things so well, Kayleigh. What does it take at this point, ballot-wise? Because if Republicans push too hard now and unearth even more stuff, although they haven't had to do anything, because this guy's wife was pretty helpful with the Oppo even. But is it better for Republicans to let him sit on that ticket even all the way through July 13th? Is it better for Democrats to take him off the ticket now, leave him on for next Tuesday? At least you could say, well, they can't get his name off the ticket for next Tuesday, right?
Yeah,
the ballot for next Tuesday.
He's going to win. There's no way the sitting governor will win, even though she flagged her name is still on the ballot. So
Janet Mills,
yes,
you're talking about.
Exactly.
Right.
So if I were at the RNC, I drop the Oppo research July 14th and trickle it out and
there you go.
Make sure this guy never sees elected office. And I agree with you, Lisa. There's more to come. They're sitting on it. He had an active profile, as recently as a few days ago. Mm-hmm. You can better believe the RNC did deep research into the other usernames on that profile. So more to come and a lot of questions. Just answer the question about Reddit too. All right, man, where we are in political life.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kayleigh McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.